Okay, good morning. So what I was thinking is that we know we have this concept during Elul, this idea of Hamelech Basadeh, that the king comes down from on high. HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes down and he enables us to connect with him in a much more profound and much deeper way because he's closer, which is reflected in our davening. We say Melech Ozer Moshiach Magain. In the first bracha of the Shemona Esrei, which is the Melech is the king. So the commentaries explain that's the furthest. Melech Ozer, someone who helps. He's a helper, helps from quite a high place. Moshiach, someone who redeems, who assists in a real way by much closer. Magain is a person who stands in front of another person to protect them from any damage. So that's really where HaKadosh Baruch Hu transforms from this king, which is so far away, into the Magain during this time of Elul. That being the case, I thought let's find something, if we can, in the parsha that will reflect this melech, and there it is. Ki tavo el haaretz. The Torah tells us, but when you come into Eretz Yisrael, Asher Adonai Elohecha nosein lach, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you, v'rashta v'shavta ba, and you inherit it, and you take all the places that you need to, and you dwell in it. V'amarta, and then you'll say, Asima alai melech. Give us a king. Like all the goyim, like all the nations of the world that are around us. So it's not 100% clear. According to all the Mefarshim, is this a mitzvah or is this just a response to what will inevitably happen? That Am Yisrael will be settled in the land of Israel and everything will be fantastic, and they'll look around them and they'll see, oh, there's a different way in which the rest of the nations are run. That they run according to this concept called kingship. That there's a single leader, and that single leader is powerful. He takes them to war. He deals with all matters of state and things like that. And therefore, we also want one of those things. And if that is the case, so let's just go over it and we'll come back. If that is the case, then soma tasim alecha melech. You can put a king on you, but the double language, som tasim, that it's quite a deep investment. Let's call it. That you have to make this king alecha on you. It's not really the way of the Jewish people to so easily accept authority. We are known as an Am Kasher Oref, and that's not in any way trying to belittle Am Yisrael. It's part of our makeup, is that we don't just simply allow authority. But the king is Asher Yivchar Adonai Lecha Bo. The king is a representative of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that's the one HaKadosh Baruch Hu chooses. It's got to be from within your brothers. You have to put him on you. You have to ensure that person there has is seen with the reverence that he needs. You can't put an ish nochri. We'll see what ish nochri means. A nochri means a stranger. Who's not your brother. So let's try and understand what this is. What this is all about. The different commentaries bring in different ways of trying to understand. So, firstly, the Orach Chaim HaKadosh says, "Kavanat haktuvim hi al zeh haderech lefi sheyesh b'minu hamelech beis gedorim." So there are two gedorim, there are two structures within which the concept of a king exists, of the appointment of a king. First thing, sheyeh hamiftach boi lanhig hamilchamot ba'otzim chochmato. The first thing is that he's got to be able to go out to war. And through his strategic way of dealing with things, he's got to go out there and fight like all the other kings of the nations, and that's what it means. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't like. Hashem doesn't like that. Hashem doesn't want a king that is going to be just a normal king that's going to go out to war and then operate out of his own feelings, because that's not the way we work things. Whether it's good or bad. And what the biggest problem is that when a person starts taking the leadership role as the king, the one who has all the power, then what they can also do is they can start feeling that power, become power hungry. We know that in the world that's what occurs. They can become so, excuse me, attached to the power that their power makes them to remove themselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want that. That's one issue. And the second way in which the king can be is in order not to go out to war, but Israel, is to come there as to represent the Jewish people through the manner in which they behave, which brings kavod and tiferet, glory and honor to the Jewish people. So then that is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu really wants, to save us from the nations of the world in the way that he's done, in a beautiful way. We read through the Sefer of Shoftim and the Sefer of Malachim, where the kosher kings, the kings that were worthy of being the real kings of the Jewish people, brought great honor and great schus to the Jewish people. And that's really what Hashem is concerned about, is that he says, Ki tavo el haaretz. So you're going to come into this land, you're going to come into Eretz Yisrael, you're going to come following on the total destruction of the people inside the land of Israel. And in coming there, you say, hold on, we want to be like everybody else. We can only be like everybody else, not to be like everybody else, but rather to be an example to what leadership and appropriate behavior should be in the world in which they come into contact. Excuse me. The Kitzur Baal HaTurim says that in these words, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu presents it in the Torah, in these words we can see a hint. The word ki tavo, he says, B'gematria Yimei Shmuel. In other words, there's a certain level of nevuah that is presented in the pasuk, the way that Baal HaTurim presents it, that Hashem says there will be a time where you will want to set this king, and that king will be in the time of Shmuel. So why is it stuck in the time of Shmuel? So he says, because says because until the time of Shmuel, the Plishtim themselves, who were the great enemy of the Jewish people, always have been over the centuries, that they didn't have a king. They just had different like tribal warlords. But all of a sudden they get a king, and then hold on, there will be the Am Yisrael will say, we also want that. We also want this idea of having this king. Says the Baal HaTurim, that look where it comes from. Look where the space where it comes from. What's the role of the king? The role of the king is not just simply to be a leader. The role of the king really is to lead the Jewish people in a value-based space. And what is that? If you look just above these psukim dealing with the king, it speaks about Avodah Zarah, it speaks about the Asherah, it speaks about all different types of idol worship, and therefore he says that the purpose of the king, the purpose of the king is to be that singular leader who is able to uproot all that which is not Torah valued within Am Yisrael at that point in time. The Malbim comes along and he says the following. He says, we understand, Ki tavo el haaretz, when you come into the land of Israel, Ikar hakavana lelamed shelo nitchayevu bazeh ad achar Yeshua. You have to understand, he says, is that it's not a mitzvah until everybody is settled in the land of Israel. She'ein mitzvah noheget ad achar Yerusha v'yeshiva b'chol zeh gadol koach hamitzvah. Says what? But we need to understand, if that's the case, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu give it to you? Yeah, because koach hamitzvah sheyagdim scharam kodem sheba ha'et litchayvot hamitzvah. He says that it's an amazing thing that we are given the mitzvah and we're given the reward even before the time of the actual execution of that mitzvah, because the fact is that knowing that there's a mitzvah in place and that Am Yisrael will do that, says the Malbim, v'yazor lahem lavo el haaretz, that it'll help them to get into the land of Israel, because when they come, they'll have the schut to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. In other words, what he's saying is that the mitzvahs are given to give us the ability and the power in order for us to be able to do them at a later stage, even though they're not necessarily work right now. It's an interesting idea and theological discussion, I suppose, that we are given the mitzvah, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us the power to fulfill that mitzvah, even if we're not aware of that. Because ultimately, as we say, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us lahagdil Torah ve'adir. He wants the Torah, he wants the mitzvahs to be pervasive through the world, and therefore he'll give us the ability to perform them in that way. The Rabbeinu Bachaya points out that the people will come, and it's an amazing nevuah, it's an amazing prophecy. The people are going to come and they're going to say, we want kechol hagoyim asher svivotai, or like all the nations around him. What does that mean? That they want the nation around us? He says then that we need to understand that it's not that that the purpose is to have a king who is all powerful in the way of the rest of the time, but rather the idea is that how do Am Yisrael relate to the world around them if we are living in a kind of a theological basis where everything is according to what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants, but there's no statesman as such, statesperson, let's say, as such, who's able to engage with the rest of the world that they, in a manner in which they can understand. And that's why that's so important. He says, because there are nations of the world around us, and we need people to be able to create. And then the Torah continues and says, you can put this king. You can put this king, but you need to understand that there's certain conditions on who this king has to be. He has to be, number one, he's got to be a Jew. He can't be a Nochri, and it has to be a person that that comes with the stamp of approval, so to speak, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore all the different conditions as to what how the king should be. The Rabbeinu Bachaya says that when it says Som tasim alecha melech, that you must put him as your king on you, he says that you have to understand that it's not just the king. He's not just an ordinary king, but rather he's got shetahei emato alecha. You got to have absolute fear. That's what ema is. It's real fear. It's like raw fear and complete reverence. Now, what does that mean? You can't ride on his horses. You can't sit on his seat. You can't use anything of the king's thing. Not only that, but I feel that even if he says that he's able to, he gives over of his honor, you can't take that. You can't in any way dishonor the king. And then he says, "Chushuhu mate." This is the extent of how much reverence you have to have. Keilav nisrafim alav. Everything is destroyed with him. And no one else is allowed to use his slaves or his maidservants except another king. And that is why it's such a big thing for the king to be able to stand. He even gets precedence when it comes to being in the Beis Hamikdash. And then he says, we have to understand, and this is where I realize that this is that this concept of kitavo la'aretz and bringing the king really connects to what we in the space that we're in right now, Elu, which is what we started with. Al derech hakabbalah, som tasim alecha melech. What does it mean? Som tasim alecha melech. You must put a king. Yadua kocho shel melech mahu. We understand the strength of what a king is. Kihu regel revi'i shebemerkava, because that is the fourth regel. It's the fourth leg of the Merkava. The Merkava is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's chariot. And that's Nikra Malchut. That is the ultimate. The ultimate thing is this Malchut, is this kingship. Because really, what this really means when it says Som tasim alecha melech, is that not that you can put the king. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want there to be another king. He wants there to be him as the king. Som tasim alecha melech. Why would you want another king when you've got me? We understand that there are practicalities, as many of the Mefarshim have explained. He says, but no, we need to understand. Ultimately, Aromimcha Elohai HaMelech. We say that every single day in Asher. Aromimcha Elohai HaMelech. That we need to Aromimcha. I will praise. I will sing praise to what Elohai HaMelech, to the God, to my God, HaMelech, the real King. And therefore, if we understand that we can have a king, and we can have political leadership, and we can have religious leadership, and we can have spiritual leadership, we can have whatever leadership we want, but ultimately, Som tasim alecha melech, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, there has to be one king. And really, that's what this process is, that as we go now towards Rosh Hashanah, we need to understand that the process of this is Som Tasim Alecha Melech. We're trying to find that way in which to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the king within our lives, so that when it does come to Rosh Hashanah and we stand in front of the Ribono Shel Olam and we blow the trumpet and the shofar, and we declare HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the king, we mean it in a real way. And what is that real way? That real way is Som Tasim Alecha Melech, that we've put upon ourselves the real king, in order everything is according, says the Malbim, everything is according to what we want out of the Ribono Shel Olam. What we are wanting is for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be Melech, Ozer, or Mashiach, or Magain, the king that is there, that is close to us, not that somebody else represents him, but rather that somebody else is there to assist us and guiding us into serving him in the best way. Have a beautiful day, everyone.